Hello, Valley Shush fans. I hope you got a chance to look at our first video and enjoy those photographs. And I hope they brought back some fond memories of your time at the resort. I know it was fun for Murray and I looking at those photographs and talking about those. On this video, Murray and I are getting together via Zoom. We're going to basically be starting off our series of videos chronicling the history of the ski resort Valley Shush. And we got together via Zoom. We did have some technical difficulties on the first couple of videos, so you'll hear Murray on the audio portion, but you won't see him on the video portion. You'll just see me on the video portion. But we just start at 1960, and I talked to Murray and asked him questions. And like I said, he has such a wealth of knowledge since he spent the entire 20 years there at the resort. I think you'll find it very fascinating, and we'll go through the history and some of the videos we're just talking, and other videos we're going to be looking at pictures, and Murray's going to be talking to us about the pictures, and I'll be asking him questions. So without further ado, this is Valley Shush, the beginning.
I'm great, Harold. Thank you very much.
All right, so for your recollection, how did our fathers get together to do this project?
Well, my father worked for your father as the manager of a business that Harold owned, as I understand it, and they became friends. And the three of us were skiing one day in really nice snow conditions in 1960 in the Hockley Valley, not at our place, of course, but another one. And I remember driving back, I was 16 at the time, driving back to Brantford, where we all lived. Harold saying something to the effect of, well, Lloyd, we should look into whether or not there's a business to be made in this ski resort stuff. So I was interested because I was really wanting to find a way to be outside the city and into the country. And I just was all ears. Anyway, we drove home, and within a week, my dad had called a real estate company in Orangeville. They said, oh, take a look at this piece of land. So that next weekend, Dad and I went up there and walked up to the top of this hill, which was covered with lots of snow at the time, a rather unusual thing, as I recall, because it wasn't like that all the time. I took some pictures, and I still have them. And we ended up, I don't know how long, a couple of months later, he and Dad, Harold and Dad, bought this land, 100 acres, and leased another 100. And a few months later, we went up there on weekends for a while, and then I was given a chainsaw and said, we're going to build a ski resort here.
You said something interesting I didn't realize. So initially, when they purchased the land, it was 100 acres, and then they were leasing the other 100, but eventually they did end up owning 200 acres total?
Yes, they had a lease with an option to buy the second 100, which they had to pay for sooner rather than later for reasons I can explain another time. But yeah, they only bought 100 acres for peanuts. If you want me to tell you the price, I will, but it was real cheap. It was not accessed by a usable road, did not have electricity, but it was the top of the hill. And we could not have built the ski hill without the top of the hill. So they bought that and leased the other from a couple who owned it and lived there, but they were willing to lease it to us at a very, very reasonable rate.
Was the as far as the land itself, that first 100 acres, was it basically like a rectangle? I kind of referenced like the fifth line. So if people never,
each 100 acres was a square. The top was a square, the bottom was a square, but between them they made a long rectangle, top to bottom.
So you guys purchased basically the top half.
Yep. And
then you leased the bottom half. Do you know who owned the top and the bottom halves?
A guy named Vernet, V-E-R-N-E-T, Lennox, a local farm fellow from a few miles away, who he pastured cattle on that acreage when we bought it for a couple of years, actually. And at the bottom, Percy and Rose Smith owned that.
Now, the people that owned the bottom, did they have a house there along the Hockley Valley Road?
Yeah, they lived in the farmhouse. They had a house and a barn and a laneway down to the Hockley Road.
Now
they had farmed it.
Okay. In one of the pictures that we'll talk about later, where the on the beginner's hill, there's a barn in the background. Is that a reference of the people that owned that bottom 100 acres?
Yeah, that's their barn. The house was quite close to it. It was a white farmhouse.
Okay, so that's who you're referencing that owned that bottom 100 acres.
Yep.
Okay, did it? I mean, when you guys bought that 100 acres, did you have to make an easement to exclude their house, or how did that go with like their home and then this 100 acres? Was that all one parcel?
Uh, it may be a little complicated, but the deal, as I understand it, like I wasn't an immediate party to this deal. It was your dad and my dad, and the couple that owned it. But the 100 acres was leased with a couple of conditions. One was that I think it was leased for 10 years, and there was to be a 5-year look at the lease and see if everybody was happy. But their house was not considered a separate piece of land. Maybe that was sloppy on our part or their part, but after 2 or 3 years, for reasons I can explain if you like, they forced us, Valley Schuss Inc. or whatever, to cut up 6 acres for them, and we paid for the rest. They were not happy with some of the things we did.
Okay. But eventually, our fathers ended up owning 200 acres, essentially the top 100 and then the bottom 100 acres.
At that point, it was 200 minus 6. I think Percy and Rose got 6 acres.
Okay. All right. So the land was purchased. So in 1960, and then do you remember, like, after our fathers purchased the property? Do you remember, like, between my dad and your dad, like, with you, like, coming up, like, all right, here's, in other words, the thing that kind of astounds me is like, okay, you got two guys that are big dreamers. They want to build a ski resort. They buy 200 acres. Then the next thing I can imagine, because they've never done this before. I mean, did all three of you just kind of look around at each other like, okay, let's get started? Or was there like a game plan, or like, like, did anybody look at the other person like, I don't know, what's next? How did like the first step start towards like, okay, we got the land, now what?
Well, I was only 16 at the time, and I was not in on meetings between the two of them. I walked around the property quite a few times after that. I don't remember walking around it with your father at all. It was just my father. I do remember, I'm sorry, I went there one day in June probably with the two of them, and they were going to walk up the hill and look around. I was given the job of starting a fire down where the chalet is now, and I was to keep the fire going and have lots of coals because they were going to come back. And your dad brought this steak that looked like half a cow, and we ate it.
Can't beat that.
We cooked it there on that fire.
Nice. So I take it, we were kind of talking about this before off camera, that and I'm just paraphrasing you, that my father was more the money man and your father was more of the manager, the hands-on, the engineer, the guy that was going to make it happen. So once the process started, did you see my father around much, or was it basically you and your father, and it was like you guys were getting busy getting it done?
That's clear. Your dad, as I say, I don't remember, except that particular day, him being in the picture. Now, I was my father's son. I was only 16 at the time. What they did was, it's a pretty much of a no-brainer. They walked around enough to know that this is where the trail should go, and that's what ended up being Murray's Run. It was really not very hard to decide where the skiers were going to go.
Now, you said both of them did that?
The day we had the stake, they walked up the hill. They would have walked up, probably up Murray's Run. It was all just forest and a kind of a little slightly washed out valley at the time. But again, it was pretty clear now from my dad and I walking around it that first weekend in January, and a few more walks around. that I don't remember much about with me and my father, in the May, June period of time. I may not even have been there during May and June. I do remember this fire thing, which would have been, I think, I was in school at the time, and school ended when the end of May, I guess. I don't even know if that fire thing happened before or after I finished school, but it was a weekend when, the three of us went up there. Nobody else was with us that time. Sometimes my mother would come with us, but she didn't really have much to do with it.
Yeah. The thing that I was wondering about is, and you've seen this before, but this is the original contract that my father purchased the first pummel lift that went in, and that the purchase date on that was of May of 1960. So did you feel that you were under a lot of pressure, like once you guys started this project to get ready for the first season, which would have been the fall winter of, or I should say the like, however you want to say it, the fall winter of 60 going into the winter of 61, to get this thing up and running, since they spent, my father spent a lot of money on this lift. So, I mean, did you sense any pressure, like, hey, we're in this thing for the long haul, and we got a lot to do?
The short answer is no. My father didn't know how to express pressure on me. He was the most gentle guy you can imagine. He and Harold, if there was any pressure, it would have been between them. I started after school was out, and I think I didn't even start until sometime in July, cutting trees down. And eventually we bulldozed and, put up the ski lift and everything else. Other people were involved. I didn't install the ski lift. I cut the trails and moved the wood off to the side and kind of supervised the bulldozing. But I didn't feel, it's a long time since this happened, and I didn't feel any pressure. My dad was he's not someone who could convey pressure. He was just very reasonable. This is what we have to do. Let's do it. But I had already, before they even bought the ski lift, I had been arranged to go to Air Cadet Camp for the first week or two of summer holiday, and then Junior Red Cross Camp for another week after the holiday. So I didn't get there till probably mid-July.
Okay.
And I had we started with hand saws of all things on one weekend, and realized pretty quickly that we were not going to get this done with hand saws. So they bought a used Homelite chainsaw and gave it to me and said, "Here you go." It was dull. It was very, very dull. We had to get it sharpened, and I had to learn how to use it.
What was the name of the chainsaw?
Homelite.
Homelite. That's interesting.
I think they still make them.
I remember those, for many years ago, but I remember the Homelite brand. So that's
yeah. It's an American brand, and there were several, McCullough, et cetera, but at that time it was the one to buy. I mean, it was the most common one.
Yeah. Do you remember, did you have, like, once the project started, did your dad hire many other folks to help him? So obviously you were very young, you were still in school, you had things going on, but do you remember your dad employing other people to assist him in getting the project underway?
Well, yes. I don't think he hired anyone to do the ski trails. Me and my high school friends and a cousin would be there, pretty much all summer long. We lived in a little tent at the bottom of the hill, and actually we tended at the top of the hill as well for a while. I have pictures of that, both of them. But we were, the guys who were cutting the trees, and then I don't know what the date was exactly, but this big bulldozer came from St. George, just north of Brantford. A guy named Green had this big bulldozer, and they floated it up there, and he started to knock the stumps down that we had cut way too high. They were higher than they needed to be, but he just buried them all. And the ski lift, I don't remember the exact way it was put up. I know somebody was digging holes. I remember a local backhoe came and dug holes, and we poured concrete. I remember the Heiko was the name of this ready mix gravel company up the Hockley Road. So I was a witness to that stuff all through the summer, and then I went back to school after that. But he hired a local carpenter Gordon Lennox to build the chalet. Frank Summerhays, a friend of your dad's, provided the building. A local bulldozer, little bulldozer guy from Shelburne, he did the bulldozing of that site for the chalet. So a few people were hired for sure to get things going.
Do you remember, one of the things when you're talking about the lift line, when you look at big ski resorts, the challenge of pouring the footers for the lift towers or whatever, obviously there was some vertical challenge there. Do you remember how they got the concrete up in the steep parts of the lift line, how they poured those footers where they were going to put the lift towers?
In our case, the only real steep part of the hill was the very bit at the top and a bit at the bottom, but you could get at those with a ready mix truck by, in the case at the bottom of backing down part way and emptying the concrete. So it wasn't logistically all that difficult. It was all glacial chilled anyway. There was no bedrock there, and most of the hill was almost flat anyway. The top and the bottom were, there was these steep sections, but the tower footings were not all that hard to get at. I don't even remember that, whether we had to use occasionally we would use a track bulldozer with a front end loader on it to move concrete, but I don't even know whether we did that time. I don't think we did actually. Okay. Later on other lifts, I think we did.
Did you have any assistance from the Palmolift, the first lift that you bought? So in other words, you guys bought the land. You want to build a ski resort. You start preparing it. You start cutting the trees down. They order this lift. Now, granted, nobody has ever put up a lift before. Did Palmolift send somebody there to assist you? And actually, once you had all the material there, as far as the towers and the cable, and to help you assemble the lift, or how did that portion go of actually putting the lift together?
What I remember is that the Palmolift had been sold through Joseph Wider, who started Blue Mountain up in Collingwood. He was a European as well, and he had the agency to sell Palmolifts in Canada. We bought it through him, and he would have known all about it. I think he was there at least once, but I don't remember him until later when I used to go to meetings where I'd meet him. But Mr. Pomagolsky, he spliced the cable. That would be after the towers were up and the whole thing was together. But we had a set of drawings, and my dad was a mining engineer, so your dad was an engineer as well. So they knew what the drawings meant, and we had a couple of local guys. One was a carpenter and a mechanic, and very smart guy in this little team, and we put it together.
So it was basically, they sent you the blueprints or whatever. They sent you all the pieces, and you had a little bit of assistance, but really it was you guys that put it together.
Well, yes, and as a matter of fact, it was a pretty complicated ski lift in a couple of ways, but they got it together. But there were problems really almost from the beginning with a certain strange thing that it had a bend in the middle. It went halfway up the hill and then it changed directions, and having the bars, the hangers go around, going up and going down at that location caused endless problem for years and years. Finally, we replaced the ski lift.
Now, when you say problems, what kind of problems were you experiencing?
It's a bit technical, but these Palmolift hangers, the bar, unlike a T-bar or a lift, let's say, that goes straight and doesn't change direction, when you were at the top of the steep part of the bottom of the hill, and it changed direction, so you would change directions with it. You could see the tracks, but the bar had to go through a real contortion, not so much on the way up, but on the way down, it had to do like a handstand just to get the bars down past this corner. It's hard to explain, but it would mess up very frequently, sometimes on a Friday, and the guys would be up all night long, drinking beer and swearing, trying to get the darn thing back together. And I lived in the chalet at that time, or I was the kid in the chalet, and I'd get to go out and watch them now and then and learn something. But it was really a mechanical, I don't know, a problem at times.
But I mean, looking back, was that something that was like a self-induced problem because you decided not to make it a straight line and you had that kink in it?
Well, yeah, so that's a good description of it. Dad and Harold not having done this before, and the Palma people, they advertised that they could do this with their lifts, which no other company, to my knowledge, could do. So they bought that because they thought that it would be better or a lot less bulldozing, let's say, to do it that way. In retrospect, I think everybody agreed they probably should have spent more money on bulldozing and got a lift that went straight, but they didn't.
Where was the challenge at that was going to require the, like the extra excavating as far as bulldozer work? So, I think everybody realizes that knows anything about the resort knows where the bottom is,
Yeah.
where the lift started. And then I think most people that have skied there know the steep part, the first steep part you're talking about, then you kind of come to that top part and then it kind of plateaus. And then as you almost get to the top, then it climbs back up again. So where was the challenge that they decided not to spend the money?
Okay, the simple fact was the bottom and the top were more or less fixed. There was the bottom. There was no other logical place for the bottom of a lift. And pretty much the top, you could have moved it back and forth a little bit. But if you were to draw a straight line from the bottom to the top, most of it would have been on a side hill and required quite a lot of bulldozing to make a level lift line. Okay. So for half of the bulldozing costs, they made that decision.
Let me ask you this. So if you're at the bottom of the hill and you're going up the hill, was the excavation going to be on the right side of the lift? Is that where the straight line would have been, or would have been on the left side of going up the hill?
Well, it would have been to the right of where the lift was at the bottom section. In other words, to the left, to the right on the way up. And actually, if you were skiing down Murray's Run, it would have been on your right also near the bottom of the hill, but it was all a steep side hill.
Right. So it would take a lot of grading to cut into that hill to make it a straight.
Probably three or four times of what they did spend, to get it the way it was.
Yeah, then I would imagine you would have had a challenge with erosion and, cutting into that bank and stabilizing that bank.
It would have really, it would have been messy, but as it happens later on, we did it. We went and ran that T-bar straight, the T-bar that replaced the Palma lift. It went straight.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Well, it was a straight lift, yeah.
But I mean, they did
the bulldozing they should have done in the beginning.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, because that's all I know was because my recollections, for everybody, the resort was built in 60 or started in 60. I wasn't born until 62, so I really don't have any recollection probably till the early 70s, but I don't ever remember the Palma lift. My earliest recollections were always the T-bar. So that was a straight shot then. So that's maybe why I'm getting a little confused then. So, all right. All right, so you guys this is 1960. We're talking about the beginning. You got the lift installed. Do you remember how many runs you had available for that first ski season?
Well, it really was only Murray's Run, but we knew we had to have something other than this one run, which I suppose you could call it a medium difficulty run. Really, it was only hard at the very top. But we needed a beginner's trail, and that became what was called the Caribou. It required some bulldozing, but not nearly as much as Murray's Run did. And it was much more gentle. And another one between the ski lift and Murray's Run, which had a very short, steep section in the middle of it. It was called Windigo, I think. I think my mother named that. But again, the trails were not terribly challenging, as most skiers who skied there would remember. But it was nice intermediate terrain and beginner terrain for skiers.
Right. All right. So as we're leading up to the official opening of the ski season, do you remember? Obviously, so our fathers made this purchase of the land. They started developing it. They got the lift in. They got a few runs in. how about the marketing? How did they know, how did people know that there was a new ski resort in the Hockley Valley?
I don't know the nuts and bolts of that, but I know we had signs in the neighborhood, here and there along the highways, 3 or 4 of them, I guess. And there was at that time, a group of ski area owners. I don't think it was formal until that winter. I went to the initial meeting, but there were others who knew about ski hills in Ontario, and there was this a ski show, I guess you could call it, at a place in Toronto. I'll remember the name, but about a dozen ski resorts and certain people who sold clothing and skis and stuff like that, did their booths at this ski show in Toronto. And we went there. I remember going there with Dad, and Harold was probably there, to try and flog the business. I was kind of uncomfortable because I was really shy. But anyway, we did that, and that would be, certainly part of the marketing. There might have been radio spots. I don't know. I know we always reported ski conditions on the radio, which at that time was going thing. Saturday morning, people would listen to the radio and they'd know what the conditions were.
Now, do you remember, as far as when you're talking about the radio, I'm sure that whole industry has changed so much, but was there like a local radio station in Orangeville, or are you talking something in Toronto, or where do you have any recollection of a radio station?
Well, it would have been Toronto. I don't think Orangeville had a radio station. I don't even know if it has now. It may, but no, it would have been Toronto.
Okay. Do you have any memory of like AM? Back then, I'm sure it was an AM station.
Everything was AM, yeah. No.
Okay.
The various radio stations. I mean, this fledgling Ontario Ski Area Operators Association, as it was originally called, the name eventually changed, but that association was just sort of getting up and running, and it would have been facilitated by shows like that. The guys would talk together and say, well, we should have a lobby group or an organization, and that did come to pass. And again, I was at meetings for a number of years, and I was at the inaugural meeting up in Collingwood.
Okay. All right, well, I guess the big question is, well, how was season 1? So how did you bought the land, you put all this work into making the trails, putting a lift in, and now it's time to open. Do you remember how season 1 went?
Well, it was a disaster, as a matter of fact, but we did buy a Bombardier Muskeg tractor as a grooming machine. Also, probably not the best decision. We did use it for 10 years. I drove it a lot, but it was not the best grooming machine, but we'd managed. And we actually bought a little Ford tractor, I think then, but maybe in the spring. But anyway, we had the Bombardier, which could get up the hill, but there was so little snow that winter, like amazing little snow. We had bought used hay, or cheap hay at farms around, and covered the bulldozing, which was just sand and dirt, to try and cover it with something that skis wouldn't get dull on. But there was hardly any snow for the first 3 years. Wow. And no kidding, we used to ski at other ski resorts. The first winter, 60, 61, we'd go up to Hockley or the Beaver Valley and Collingwood to ski, because we couldn't ski at our own place. This is not a snow belt.
Now, those other places I went to, I'm assuming that was just natural snow. They just happened to be in the snow belt.
Well, yeah, that's a short answer. Yes. Barrie areas were in a snow belt. Calling would be marginally same, because it was on Georgian Bay, and Barrie was downstream from Georgian Bay. We were not. We were a long way from Lake Huron, and that's where most of the snow would have come from. So it was lousy snow for several years. We got through, and we even had some sort of a ski race, as I recall, the first winter, but there wasn't much snow. I mean, we did manage to get through, but there was a lot of shoveling and moving snow in pickup trucks and stuff like that.
So do you remember overall, was it like a feeling amongst, like, our fathers and the people that worked there? Was it a big disappointment, or was it like we made it and we're on to season 2?
I was not party to conversations between our two fathers very much because they lived in different places. Well, they lived in Brantford, but the ski hill was in Orangeville.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine they were wringing their hands through that time. As they say, my father never laid any kind of tension on me at all. He was a very reasonable guy, and he was my boss. So, we just did what we had to do. I was going to school at this time anyway. I was still going to school in Brantford and coming up on weekends. So I got to watch, the results of whatever went on during the week. And it was a big adventure for me. But I'm sure they were thinking, well, why did we do this? Did we make a mistake? And Ontario is not famous for heavy snow.
Right.
But the fact is, there were other ski resorts in the valley. This is germane. There were several other ski hills in the valley, none of which had snowmaking when we started. And they struggled with the same conditions as we did, lack of snow mainly. We used to joke about having the fastest grass in Ontario.
Off the top of your head, do you remember the name of the other resorts that were operational the first year that you started or were operational? I guess, in other words, your competition.
Yeah, I know them all. When we built in that year, there were Cedar Springs, it was called, which had been there for a few years. They just had rope tows. Really close to that place called Twin Hearths, which
where was Cedar Springs at?
Well, as the crow flies, it was like about a kilometer due east of us, in the same valley, the same side of the valley facing north.
Okay.
It was much more generally steep than ours. Ours had these easy flat spots, but it was a group from Hamilton that owned it, and it was a club. As I say, they had rope tows, and Doug Pritt on the other side at Twin Hearths, he had rope tows. And then Hockley Valley Ski Club, way down west of us, it had 5 different rope tows, all sort of in sequence, one after the other. And another smaller one called Happy Hollow on the other side of that hill, it had a couple of rope tows too. So there were 4 other places running when we started. We bought the only non-rope tow ski lift, and the others were kind of jealous and they wanted to get on board, so they did.
Yeah. While you're talking, I'm going to see if I can pull up that picture. Let me see here of the. Nope, that's not it. I do have a picture. I think. Let's see if this is it. Okay, so you give me the names again. You said Aspen.
Well, Twin Hearths
okay.
became Aspen later. The name changed.
Okay, so I see Aspen up here. Can you see my cursor when I'm moving it around on the picture?
I can see your cursor, but I see a great big sign in the middle of this saying this meeting is being recorded, and I can't see most of what you've got up there. I don't know if Cynthia can help me with that, but I can't see most of what you have. There's this great big white thing in the middle, and it's still there.
Okay.
Now maybe that's our problem with our computer.
Okay. Yeah, see on this picture, I see Aspen, I see Cedar Springs, I see Hockley Hills Resorts, I see Hockley Valley Winter Park, Montclair Ski Center, and then Valley Schuss. So,
well, yeah, Montclair came later.
Okay.
Hang on, Cynthia might be able to help us here. Okay, there we disappeared that white thing.
All right.
Yeah, these maps, it's really hard for me to identify a ski hill from those maps.
But do you see where my cursor is up here in the left-hand corner?
Yeah.
All right, so that was Aspen. So you said that one originated from Cedar Springs?
Well, in an odd way, Cedar Springs was a bunch of people from Hamilton who used to ski near Hamilton at a little place they called Cedar Springs near the Niagara Escarpment. And they decided, some of them used to go skiing in the Hockley Valley before there were any ski lifts there. So some wise person said, or people said, well, we need a bigger ski hill. And they went looking at the topographic maps and they identified this nice little valley, and they eventually bought this property. That became Cedar Springs. Later on, the name changed to Cedar Highlands years later, but a friend or a guy who was in that original club, Doug Pritt, he was a little difficult to get along with, and he said, I want my own ski resort. So his dad bought a piece of land on the other side of their hill and built him a ski resort. that was Twin Hearts.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, this is a very neat picture. I got this picture a couple years ago. I was up at the Hockley Valley Resort, and I went up to the maintenance shop at the top of the hill, and a couple of guys there were nice enough to talk to me, and they do remember in their youth Valley Schuss. I think more so after it closed, like right after it closed in the early 80s there, and then riding dirt bikes and being on the trail. But they're the ones that gave me this picture.
Okay, well, I can barely read the print, but I kind of recognize these maps, and
Yeah.
I can update them. I'm sure, if you wanted to listen to me for long enough. But they just a minute. Yeah, the Hockley Valley Winter Park, I think I don't remember the name being attached to it, but the next property to Valley Schuss, not long after we started, a couple of years, I guess. It was purchased by a group of teachers from Toronto, and they put up a rope tow, and another member of that group put up a rope tow on the other side. And they tried to run them as businesses, but they're more hobbies than anything, as was ours, really.
Yeah. Over here on the bottom right-hand corner, I think I remember them telling me they referred to it. This was like on the back side of the Hockley Valley Resort. Do you remember?
Well, I mean, I know the terrain pretty well, and I don't see any buildings at the bottom there. On the right, there probably was something there, but that would have been Happy Hollow, I think. Now, that was probably taken after Hockley. I call it Hockley Hills Resort. It was an amalgamation of Hockley Valley Ski Club and Happy Hollow.
Okay.
Hockley Valley Resort people bought Happy Hollow, and then they expanded it into what's now Hockley Valley Resort.
Okay. All right.
The chalet would have been way at the right end of that open field, the
Okay.
low end.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's kind of a neat thing about being able to look at these pictures.
I even know the hills in the background. I know which road went over those hills. I knew the area quite well.
Yeah. All right, Murray. Well, I think we did a pretty good job of covering episode 1 of the beginning of the resort. Is there anything else you remember, like from the initial stages up through completing season 1? That stands out to you?
Yeah, I know I drove the Bombardiers some that winter, although Gordon Lennox was there through the week and he did most of it. But I remember rollers that a couple of them we made. One of them didn't last very long. The other one didn't last very much longer, and on and on. I mean, grooming is a whole area that we could talk about some other time. But I was just this long, skinny kid with long skis, having fun skiing on the weekends. And I thought of myself as the son of the owner. At that time, I didn't think much about your dad because I didn't see much of him. I mean, he was there at New Year's. There was a New Year's party, and friends of both of them came, and I met all those people then. I mean, I knew your dad casually before that, but not terribly well.
Yeah, and I have pictures of the holiday parties from probably, I think it's like 1960, 61, basically once the resort was open. So we'll share those with everybody when we're looking at pictures. But I think the nice thing to keep everybody tuned is eventually we're going to get on Facebook as well. And between the pictures that I have from my family and the pictures that Murray has, we got a bunch of photos that we're looking forward to sharing with everybody, and have Murray give us a little perspective on each one of the pictures that we're looking at. But Murray, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to episode 2 when we just continue to chronicle the history of Valley Schuss. So it was good talking to you.
Great. I'll sharpen my skis.